Our first presenter is Ömer Cengiz. He was born in Gaziantep in 1990. He attended primary, secondary and high school in Gaziantep. After graduating from high school in 1997, he started to study at Hacettepe University, Department of American Culture and Literature. He has been living in Ankara for years and he is now in the third year. He has recently started internship at Necdet Seçkinöz Primary School. Currently, he is attending the English Language Teaching Certificate Program at Hacettepe University. His second foreign language is German at elementary level. His interests are gender studies and American short stories. He has attended linguistic courses. He wants to pay his way as an English teacher after graduation. Now, he will present his paper.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I want to start my presentation by Bilkent University for this nice organization. The voice of the voiceless other, representation of the oppressed woman in a doll's house and their awakening. The 19th century was the period when true independence or equality for women was impossible when men held exclusive legal authority over property and children. Until the 20th century, women were seen as second-class citizens and their freedom was quite limited. This limitation was greater when they were married, when they were on court, as compared with their single status that is found law. Married women did not have the legal rights that they have today, such as voting, holding certain jobs, filing lawsuits on their own behalf, and retaining custody of their children after divorce, which was once the priority of males. Women were seen as the angels of the house and members of the cult of domesticity, which was regulated by men. Also, the 19th century was the period of grievances and rebellions by oppressed women and feminist responses through fiction such as A Doll's House and The Awakening. The aim of this paper is to analyze the oppressed protagonists, Nora and Edna, and their resistance to romantic paternalism, patriarchal oppression, and finally, their escape to freedom, which laid the foundation of their individual voices. Set in Norway, A Doll's House by the Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen focuses on 19th century family life and the oppressed wife, Nora, and her responsibilities towards her husband, Torvald, and her 3 children. The subject matter of the play is the oppressive marriage of a middle-class wife and mother, and her awakening, which is followed by her feminist response to patriarchal ideology. Nora borrowed money from Krogstad without male permission to pay for a vacation to the south, which she hopes will cure her husband's ill health. She secretly transcribes documents to earn the money to repay the loan. Her awakening comes with Torvald's harsh reaction to her efforts, which results in her decision to escape from her gilded cage. Set in New Orleans at the end of the 19th century, The Awakening by Chopin focuses on the protagonist Edna's changing attitudes towards her husband, Leon Pontellier, and children. Edna gains a new identity and starts to focus on her own individuality and freedom after meeting Robert. As a nonconformist, Edna commits suicide rather than submit to the restrictions of 19th century society. Ultimately, the novel uses a woman's awakening to sensuality, sexuality, autonomy, and adultery as a means to explore the romantic conflict of self and society. Both The Awakening and Doll's House are works of fiction which include protagonists who are oppressed in their particular society. The main female characters are described as inferior and their dependence on males determine their gender roles. Oppression comes with romantic paternalism, which is the 19th century idea that power belongs to men who deserve it biologically. Accordingly, protection of women is a male task and husband remains unchallenged head of the household. Moreover, a woman's legal status is shaped by her relationship to men within the family as one's daughter or wife. Nora in A Doll's House is the epitome of restrictive ideology. Out of love for Torvald, Nora borrowed money by forging the signature of her dying father without her husband's consent to pay for a vacation which will cure Torvald's illness. When this secret is exposed, Torvald reacts harshly and reminds Nora of the position she is in by altering code. But I won't let you bring up the children. I dare not trust you with them. End of quote. This reaction exemplified the hypocrisy of the time because society expected a woman who would sacrifice herself for her children and husband when it is necessary, yet punished her if that sacrifice went beyond limits, social limits. In the 19th century, middle-class women were expected to be members of the cult of domesticity, which is cultural ideology that dictates women's place in the home. As called, the cult of true womanhood, Walter described it as the attributes by which a woman judged herself and was judged by her husband, her neighbors, and society, which could be divided into four cardinal virtues: piety, purity, submissiveness, and domesticity. With them, she was promised happiness and power. Both Nora and Edna were oppressed by the society as a result of the so-called virtues of the time. Even though Nora tries to become a good mother and wife, Tuğlu treats her as if she is not intelligent enough to what is she doing and uses guilt to keep her from living. As for the awakening, Edna looks for love, care, companionship, understanding, and intimacy. Yet, she is oppressed again with society's expectation of submission, which was perhaps the most feminine virtue expected of women. Social constructed gender laws implemented double standards over men and women. Mr. Pontellier Léonce traveled without taking his wife Edna, yet she is supposed to be submissive, pure and domesticated. Traditional gender roles cast men as rational, strong, protective, and firm. They cast women as emotional, weak, nurturing, and submissive. These gender roles have been used very successfully to justify the inequalities as excluding women from equal access to leadership and decision-making positions. Economic dependence is another problem of the oppressed 19th century women, and they struggle with the idea that if one is not economically independent, then one is not independent. Both Edna and Nora are the housewives who receive money their husbands to survive. The economic dependence makes these characters victims of romantic paternalism, with Nora seems to beg for money from Torvald, as in the example of Christmas spending. Clearly, men are the movers, doers, actors, while the women are passive, as in all patriarchal societies. All superior qualities have been dedicated to males, and all inferior ones to the women. If we look at religious books, God creates man firstly, then the woman from his bones. In mythology, Zeus is the omniscient God, and goddesses, his wives, are not as important as him. While man is active, woman is passive. Male is the man of head, and female is the woman of heart. Man is honest, and the woman is bitch. Patriarchy is sexist, because it promotes the belief that women are innately inferior to men. However, this inferior position of women in patriarchal society is constructed through illness such as hysteria. Hysteria, which derives from the Greek word hystera, that means woman, and refers to psychological disorders deemed peculiar to women and characterized by over-emotional, extremely irrational behavior, is particularly insulting to women. In the play, Torvald tells Nora, quote, "You are sick, Nora. You have a fever. I really don't think you are in your right mind," end of quote. As regards to the awakening, the doctor, who does not know anything about soul but physical things, is a patriarchal figure. Calls Edna a hysteric by telling Léonce, quote, "Let your wife alone for a while. Don't bother her. Don't let her bother you. Woman, my dear friend, is a very peculiar and delicate organism." Moreover, the patriarchy continually enforces power over women. Edna's father blames Léonce for Edna's case, quote, "You are too lenient, my dear Léonce. Authority, coercion are what is needed. Put your foot down, rule at heart. The only way to manage a wife, take my word for it," unquote. Purity is another virtue of cult of true womanhood. Women are called as female whose virtues are innocence, virtuousness, modesty, and docility. Those women are called as the angels in the house. Their tasks are to care children and make the home a heaven in the heartless world for their husbands. The poets of these characters become masters who are fond of their independence and individuality rather than submission. Tyson describes the so-called angel as follows. "She had no of her own, for she is completely satisfied by serving her family. At times, she may be sad about the problems of her others, and she frequently worries about those in her care, but she's never angry. She was the angel in the house. She made the home a safe haven for her husband, where he could spiritually fortify himself before resuming the daily struggles of all workplace, and for her children, where they would receive the moral guidance needed to eventually assume their traditional roles in the world. Therefore, the absence of purity is accepted as unnatural and unfeminine. A fallen woman is shown as source of sins and trouble. Nora is shown as the destroyer of men. When Torvald learns the secret, he states, quote, "I dare not say a word, to go down so miserably, to be destroyed, all because of an irresponsible woman." End of quote. Women who do not follow the cult sexual purity role are also monsters and are labeled promiscuous, while men are not held to this double standard. Although Edna seeks free life, society sees her as an adulterer. Edna is exposed to oppression, and after her awakening, which comes with Robert, she starts to paint. Obsessed with painting, she neglects the task of true womanhood. Edna's move to her own house shows the resistance of the voiceless woman against patriarchy, but she pays the price of her freedom, which is death. Nora also resists patriarchy from the very beginning. Nora borrowed money by forging the signature of her dying father. She eats macaroons even though her husband forbids it. Nora's tarantella dance is also of great importance in terms of her resistance to Torvald. During her dance, Torvald is attracted to Nora, and when they come back to their house, Nora refuses the advances by claiming to be tired, which is in today's language, "I have had it." Unlike a true woman who stays at home with her Bible and well-balanced mind and raises her son's children, Nora decides to leave her gilded cage without accepting any help from Torvald. She resists romantic paternalism with her words. Quote, "You never loved me, neither daddy nor you. You only thought it was fun to be in love with me." End of quote. What can be deduced from this point is that Nora's position has not changed. She was a dog in her father's house, and she is still a dog in her husband's house. Another representation of Edna's resistance is that Edna exemplifies the independent woman seeking to define herself on her own terms. Her awakening is a realization of her selfhood, her individuality. When Edna starts to swim, she gains an active identity. Quote, "Mr. Pontellier is beginning to realize her position in the universe as a human being and to recognize her relations as an individual to the world within and about her." End of quote. Furthermore, Edna gains her economic independence by painting. From that point onwards, she challenges the male phallocentric figure. Phallocentrism states that man is thought to be superior to woman due to his penis. Taking power from his penis to create, man uses his pen like his penis to produce, suggesting that he is innately superior to woman. However, Edna herself produces work of art with her brush as well. So it can be deduced that she resists the inequalities between the sexes. Her rebellion against conventional obligations reaches its first climax when she decides to establish a home apart from her husband. Edna's new house and sexual intercourse with Armin stresses her resistance and individuality. However, the ultimate form of resistance becomes her suicide. In Granville, where she awakens. In search of belonging somewhere in an oppressive society, Edna looks for a place which there is no beginning and end, without any limitations. Wolf explains that freedom for Edna has always meant isolation and concealment, which is why she seeks to escape these binary. She walks into the sea and commits suicide because water is fluid, free, enormous, and liberating. It's a refuge which she has no borders that can restrict her. Her suicides become her feminist response to patriarchy because it is the ultimate form of example of non-conformity. Edna and Nora make their voices heard in a repressive 19th century society and represent the voice of the voiceless other. In every domain where patriarchy reigns, woman is the other because she is marginalized. by her difference from male norms and values. These protagonists, awaken from the sleep, which comes from being a fun court, become free by reaching independence as a result of their rejection of the 19th century doctrines, either by suicide in Edna's case or by leaving her family and establishing a new life in Nora's case. Thank you for your patience.
Our next presenter is Begüm Tuğlu. Her educational background started in Liverpool, where she first started St. John's Primary School. Due to this chance, she has the competence of speaking English as a native speaker. She graduated from Cengiz High School in 2008. She received scholarships from Karacan foreign language courses for 2 years during her high school education. She ran first place in acceptance to Ege University English Language and Literature Department with the highest foreign language score in Ege University, received from national exam for attendance to universities in 2008. She has participated in the organization of Cultural Studies Symposium in 2009 as a voluntary student. She was a founder and organizer of the International Undergraduate Symposium with 5 other colleges, first held in 2010. In Ege University, she has been a holder of scholarship from Turkish Education Foundation since 2009, and she is still receiving the achievement grant owing to her ranking in the university. She has worked as a simultaneous interpreter for several organizations and firms. She is currently working as a voluntary English teacher within Turkish Education Foundation. And after graduation, she intends to carry her studies in academic grounds. And she now...
Talking too much about myself. If it's okay for you to, I'd like to do my presentation here because I've used the computer and PowerPoint. Is it working? I'm sorry if it's okay. I'll just do right there. My subject is the Ekrem portraits, presentations of dismembered women in literature. And women's facts today are bound to the fiction of the past. And since the beginning of the 20th century, women authors have been trying to change the fiction in the very ancient times in order to free the women from their handcuffs and give their voices back, which were silenced for so long. And in their celebrated work, No Man's Land, Susan Gilbert and Sandy Gilbert say, I quote from them, the plot of sexual battle is of course as old as literature itself. And they have detected that from the very beginning of the ancient times, even though implicitly or explicitly oppressed, women have the power to fight back their set-upon destiny. The plot of sexual battle may be very old, but women have this power to fight back. While the accepted history begins from the male side, Susan Gilbert and Gilbert's history begins with the feminine point and with the legendary Lilith herself. And I quote from the book that legendary Lilith, who resists Adam's and God's wish to control both her body and her language. They basically give the high road of the first feminist to Lilith and say that she was the first woman ever to resist against an authoritarian figure who is God, the very ultimate power himself. And they are pointing out that the image of women never really changed since Lilith, with all the wide variations of examples from myths, fairy tales to epics, which have inspired a male-dominated society to carry on with a similar point used in poems, plays, and novels, which aided the forces who needed the women to be kept under control, without the ability to talk back, to resist, or run away to their own conquest in life. Literature would be the perfect device for women to find the power they need by using I quote, narrative as a discourse of authority and legitimation, unquote. Women may establish their own place in the society, finally being able to have a room of one's own, as Begüm once so insisted upon. Yet this process for women is hardly an easy case, since, I quote, the universality of female subordination, the fact that it exists within every type of social and economic arrangement, is something very profound, very stubborn, unquote. And it will not change easily, especially when all the nebulous stories are being kept told to our little children, little daughters especially, since they're very little ages. And the Whispers start with the myth of Lilith, of course, and they go on with Philomela, very popular characters, Lavinia, Little Mermaid, Catherine, and with the Mud Woman. Very popular characters you will see during my presentation, and I think that you may relate to other characters you know too, because it's very universal. I'd like to start to begin the stories with Philomela, one of the oldest robberies of the wars from women. And in Ovid's recounting, Philomela is raped by her brother-in-law, Tereus, who then tears out her tongue. Philomela is silenced by Tereus so that she could not tell what happened to her to anyone else. As a woman, she does not only suffer from the invasion of masculine power over her body, but she is also stripped from any kind of defense she could possibly have, most significantly, her voice. Tereus' act of dismemberment of Philomela from her tongue is carried out physically. Nevertheless, it's also significantly symbolical. Even if Philomela had her voice, could she be able to raise it? Could she be able to tell this to anyone without being a fallen woman herself, without being Lilith, the mother of almighty creatures herself? And the answer is rather pessimistic in a male-dominated society, which finds the right to use the female body for merely the male desire or reproduction. It's learned that eventually from the tower she is bound to, Philomela manages to wave, I quote, the story of her violation into a tapestry and has it conveyed to her sister Procne, unquote, as a means of communication solely reserved for women. Thus, silent women may find a voice through which they can call their own stories. However, Martha Cutter seems to disagree on the subject that Philomela's message is indeed a permanent one. I quote, the myth's final message seems to be that women's alternative texts fail to transform in any lasting way the social or linguistic forces of patriarchal domination, unquote. Indicating that as long as the patriarchal mentality finds enough power to rule over the women to the extent of trespassing their bodies and even voices, women will have to fight harder to earn their pens and scrape their own history to the stony pages of literature. And another woman you may be familiar with is Lavinia, whose destiny is interwoven with Philomela's. And she is brought to life by Shakespeare in his one of the most bloody and terrifying plays, Titus Andronicus. In the introduction of the Titus Andronicus, this of course strikes that Shakespeare also had in mind the story of Philomela in the Metamorphosis, Book 6. The main plot of the play parallels that of Ovid's tale. Both women go through a severe act of rape, and even further, dismemberment. In Lavinia's case, this is even harsher, since not only is her tongue is cut out, but also her arms are cut out and they are replaced with tree branches. And Lavinia's only loss is not her voice, but she is also lacking the physical ability to push back her violators. She's just left there, paralyzed, without any possible escape. Demetrius, one of her violators, as if challenging her in a mocking, humiliating voice, directly addresses her. So now go tell, and if thy tongue can speak, who 'twas that cut thy tongue and ravished thee? And his rather mischievous brother, Chiron, continues where he leaves. Write down thy mind, be brave, thy mind is so, and if thy stumps will let thee play the scribe, they are really mocking, and you can see how terrifying these dialogues are towards the women. And indeed, Lavinia is represented as a mild and obedient woman, as a stereotype of the obedient Roman wife, Roman woman in the play, is left with unimaginable suffering, without any concrete proof that she can show against the invaders of her innocence, without any concrete proof that she can show against that people to take her revenge. I quote from Lamb that Lavinia seems at first to have lost the capacity for self-representation, the ability to point the finger at her rapists, or to verbally express herself and her grief. What's more is that she's lost even this ability to wash herself or commit suicide in shame, unquote. As a woman, she goes through the most dreadful tortures, yet she cannot even cry it out from the depths of her lung. All her anger is buried in her own Lavinia visibly illustrates a connection between language and violence. And another important character that we came into with her story with the other ladies too is Little Mermaid, which most of you may be familiar with, and which was also transformed by Walt Disney to delight children and incidentally to persuade a generation of American females. This story was a very popular one and had a profound effect on that generation. And The Little Mermaid is also a significant work to analyse, since it proves that even in the 21st century we live in, little girls watch and learn from these bedtime stories and are very affected by the mottos that are buried into the texts. In this story particularly, the Little Mermaid sacrifices everything she has in order to gain the immortal love of a man and become his wife, no matter what the cost is. And when the sea witch offers her deal to the Little Mermaid to give her legs, I quote from the text that, "You have the sweetest voice of any who dwell here in the depths of the sea, but this voice you must give me, the best thing you possess will I have for the price of my daughter." Unquote. But the poor mermaid replies, "If you take away my voice, what's left for me?" What she's truly left is with a pair of legs which feels like treading upon sharp knives as she walks. She can't even walk comfortably in those legs, but she's still willing to give her own voice. And she says that she's actually turning into the fantasy image of a wife for the patriarchal society, a beautiful woman who cannot walk, who cannot go anywhere else, but most importantly could never ever talk back. And she thinks to herself, "I've given away my voice forever to be with him." The Little Mermaid thinks with her inner voice, for it takes the whole compilation of a woman to be a good and silent wife. According to Zipes, I quote, "Voices and tortured, deprived physically and psychologically, the mermaid serves a prince who never appreciates her worth." Unquote. The poor girl sacrifices everything she has, even without being noticed, as if reminding the voice of Euryaltes Circe crying out, "All my efforts, tell me one of that appreciated, all taken for granted." Unquote. And there is one more lady we can mention in the Silent Ladies of Literature. This time brought to life by the renowned Bertolt Brecht in his play Mother Courage and Her Children, Catherine. Catherine stands as not only a less subjugated woman, but also she proves to be the individual body, representing the condition of a whole nation, silently suffering under the patriarchal domination of power battles in a war. Brecht gives the words to Mother Courage's lips to tell what happened to Catherine. Her dumbness comes from the war, she says. A soldier stuck something in her mouth when she was little, she utters, indicating that the soldier violated her as a child, if not psychologically with his gun, symbolically it may refer to the image of the phallus, but sexually with this act of rape. As a result of this violation, Catherine uses her voice, even though the soldier does not cut her tongue out, like in Philomela or Lavinia's case, but still Catherine uses her voice because of that soldier, which ties her story to the other women. Mother Courage could never get out of her what happened, and no one will be able to do so, for the girl's voice has already been sacrificed within the horrifying act of rape carried out by the soldier. The terrifying childhood nightmare of an invasion of a woman's body is intermingled with the invasion of land, vigorously declaring the male dominancy in the act of invasion, turning it into an act of rape over the powerless and silencing the ones who may try to speak up and defend themselves by pointing out the ones to blame for all the crimes. And there is another story I would like to mention today, The Girl Without Hands, by Begüm brothers, which is another significant work to trace the dismemberment of women, which enables men to lock the handcuffs of us women, to the point that even though the handcuffs are unlocked, women still behave the way men want them to. In this part of the story, the girl without hands is not always like this, but her father makes a pact with the devil, and in order to pay her father's debts, she willingly sacrifices her own hands. And I quote from the text, "Dear Father, do with me what you will, I am your child." So she is herself admitting that her father has every kind of right over her body and soul. He can do whatever he likes just because it's his daughter. And nevertheless, the girl is so pure and so angelic, and in Grimm's brother's fashion, that eventually God helps her, which in my opinion, another authoritarian figure, and she finds a king in the woods. And this king constructs her silver hands, but in the regaining her wholeness of her body, not only in her act of speech, because she can talk back now, but also the unity of her body, because her hands grow back again. Not the way the king likes, but the way she truly is in her natural presence. And I quote from John Kennard that the Grimm Brothers story does not surprise us with its happy ending. And as in Rachel Blow Duplessis' essay, Writing Beyond the Ending Rachel Blow Duplessis refers to is that of the heterosexual marriage plot of the 19th century fiction, in which the female protagonist must either subordinate her questing spirit in marriage or suffer the consequence, which is death. Unquote. Like most of the well-known stories, The Girl Without Hands also has the same conventional ending, happily ever after. After all the dismemberment victims, there is one more woman left behind to demonstrate subjugation. Margaret Atwood's Mud Woman, whom she created in her Circe Mud poems. I quote, Baxter's formulation of the violent quest does not see how to liberate oneself from the dominant languages that have silenced the female, unquote. Nevertheless, Atwood seems to find a way to break through the formulations. By rewriting the story of Circe in the Circe Mud poems, only this time from the notorious goddess Circe's perspective, Atwood gives the misunderstood, or rather misjudged goddess, her long-silenced voice back. She gives her the chance to address Odysseus directly as you. Circe's tongue may not be cut out like Philomela or Lavinia, but her voice was taken away by other means, by cutting her side of the story off the pages of literature. With Circe's resisting even mocking language of Odysseus, Atwood sets her stance against the traditional male-dominated perspective in literature. Furthermore, the Mud Woman in the poems becomes a symbol for women, gathering all features of subjugation carried out by men in just one body. Atwood writes, when he was young, he and another boy constructed a woman out of mud. She began at the neck and ended at the knees and elbows, based up to the essentials, and continues on writing. Every sunny day, they would row across the island where she lived, in the afternoon when the sun had warmed her, and made love to her, singing with ecstasy into her soft, moist belly, her brown, horny flesh where small weeds had already rooted. They would take turns, they were not jealous. She preferred them both. Afterwards, they would prepare her, making her hips most fascious, enlarging her breasts with their shining stone nipples, unquote. The boys prefer to stick to the essentials, for the woman does not need a head, because it would mean that she would think. She doesn't need any hands, because that would mean she would resist. And she definitely doesn't need any legs, because that would mean she would run away, or more depressingly, she could go away on her own quest, on her own adventure. And as Shirley Ortner argues in her essay, Is Female to Male as Nature is to Culture, she argues that women have, since the very beginning of the time, have been related to nature as the Mud Woman does. So by constructing the mud, they're actually constructing the idea of a woman themselves. Women have been lowered to the degree where they were limited to being a mere body, used for either the desire of men or the necessary reproduction for the society. The Mud Woman is the perfect example of the ideal woman of a patriarchal society, revealing that, even in the current days we live in, women are bound to, under the roof of the husband, father, or the grave, as in the mythical stories. The things never change, really. They have been subjected to dismemberment, to rape and mutilation, in order to be controlled. Authors such as Adrian Rich, Anne Sexton, Carolyn Duffy, and others, who have helped other women to raise their whispers into the high-pitched songs, contributed to the history of literature at the same time by revising what was missing in a patriarchal society. From Philomela, Lavinia, and Catherine to the Mud Woman, different portrayals of women affect us, silently breaking the glass placed in front of women whenever they try to set off for their own adventures. Today, the echoes of the shattering glass are being heard from every corner, given the promise of a better future in which one glorious day all women will have the power to protect the wholeness of their existence, both physically and mentally. Thank you for listening to me. These are my citations, my photographs, and this is the last picture I want to share with you. The Desperate Wives of Disney. My husband in this is an animal. Mine drives a pumpkin. Mine leaves me at home with 7 little ones. Mine wants me to wear fishnet stockings. I just pretend I'm asleep. The other one says that. This shows how desperate they really are. Thank you so much.
Our last presenter is Ekrem years he lived in Germany. There he studied fashion and worked as a TESOL teacher. Last year he returned to his school at Begüm University. Now he is a last year student. He has always fancied art in general. Therefore, after graduation, he wants to specialize in arts. He plans to have his master's degree in arts in Frankfurt.
Yes. Thanks for your presence. As you all know, classical Greek sculpture is famous for its laconic, beautiful sculptures. While sculptures achieved a more lifelike aspect in sculpture with the help of new technical advances, they added a new dimension to sculpture, which surprisingly made classical Greek works far from realism. Structural accurateness means idealistic presentations which took sculpture far beyond realism. Focusing mainly on idealism, classical sculpture idealized male body in terms of sexuality. The depiction of male anatomy was more on nudism and thus on sexuality. Technical innovations and social conditions are the reasons of this idealization of male sexuality. Greek sculpture represents more of the sexual desire for and expectations from the male body as a result of the excellency in craft works. In order to have a more clear understanding, we should have a close look at the history of Greek sculpture. First of all, the main reason of the male sexuality observed in classical sculpture is the improvements in technique. For better understanding, we should focus on the background which prepared the basis for the changes. Classical Greek art witnessed some major changes and developments before it achieved a unique sublime perfection in terms of its aesthetic excellence. Greek art could only conceive the values and utilities of classical period only after experiencing the changes and innovations of archaic period. Thus, a critical history of archaic Greek art would show the circumstances and conditions from which classical Greek art emerged. It would help us evaluate the genius success of the period sculptures. Archaic period was the period in which the seeds of classical art were sown. It had prepared technical and artistic base for its successive classical period. However, the natural process of body movement and weight balance had not yet been discovered. The most significant sculptural form of the period was the chorus, the standard male nude. As the archaic period was coming to an end, it had already developed its own characteristic features. In his book, Greek Sculpture of the Classical Period, Voiceless states, Greek sculptures refined their techniques and confirmed their ability to create realistic images of the human body in action and repose, without surrendering their profound concern with proportionate design. Despite the archaic period's incapability in depicting human anatomy realistically, the progress and the achievement of archaic period artists cannot be ignored. And in his book, Walking goes further, as he says, in Greece, for the first time in the history of men, an artist succeeded in reconciling a strong sense of form with total realism, that they both consciously sought the ideal in figure representation and explored the possibilities of rendering emotion, mood, and even the individuality of portraiture. By the 5th century BC, we see that showing the body movements, organizing the weight balance, and other technical skills had been fully understood. This new understanding and perception of human anatomy marks the classical period. The achievement in technical matters led to lifelike sculptures. It's during the classical period that the features in detail and expression have become far more natural. Archaic period works were not lifelike, even the earliest examples of the figures abruptly move us from the world of archaic reality and pattern into one in which art takes on the task of representing, even cultivating life, and not merely creating targets of life. It is the attempt of late archaic and classical sculptures to represent more than targets of life that causes the idealistic tendency in the works of art. As compared, we can say that the archaic sculpture explored its potential in creating three-dimensional patterns which represented the human body style, evolved slowly as technique improved, and as a result, these changes led to renderings which are closer to life. Once Tigri discovered how much more it could express than the conventions, symbols, and patterns of archaism, they made a virtual reach. It can be said that the new techniques inevitably resulted in an excessive praise of the human body. Artists added more of themselves to their works. Their sculptures were no more a mere imitation of earlier copies and imitations of the human body in a rigid way, but the studies produced during classical period to meet more than men carved out of marble. They stood for an idealistic and aesthetic purpose. The sculptors tried to create a virtue of their skills in sculpture. Down to around 500 in Greek art, especially the rendering male body, there was literal artificiality. The figures conveyed no more than the sum of their parts, adequately accurately delineated, adequately accurately juxtaposed. Soon when this theorem of realism in Greek sculpture would be improved further, the artists were starting to observe their subjects consciously, not merely reproducing what they had been taught of the conventions for representing a man. This stage also led to a closer observation of structure and with it a growing understanding of how a body moves, how its weight is carried, how a shape in pose can affect the placing of limbs, torso and head. Achieving some certain aesthetic standards with new lifelike technique, sculptors could not keep their realistic features for so long, as the newly acquired techniques enabled them to carve more natural and lifelike statues. On the other hand, the high aesthetic concerns and the easily attained golden proportions led the artist to create heavenly torsos. Archaic period may have lacked the realism in terms of technique, but once grasped adequate skills, classical period also lacked realism. The young and perfect male bodies of classical period were never closer to life than that of archaic stage. Portman's statement about this aspect is significant. The classical figure seems to remove itself from us through a bit to express a human, divine ideal or mood. And in his book, History of Art, Begüm also mentions of two different directions in classical sculpture. According to him, one école was concerned with the observing and analysis of human anatomy and achieving abstract realism. On the other hand, the second direction, followed by sculptors, encouraged them to seek a divine human body and establishing sublime criteria with an aesthetic idealism. Another reason for male sculpture's idealization can be found in the social background of the era. As Paglia states in her book, Sexual Persona, women played no part in Athenian high culture. They could not vote, attend the theater, or walk in the street talking philosophy. But male orientation of classical Athens was inseparable from its genius. This gender discrimination of Greek democracy was inevitably reflected on their art. Women could not find an area in which they could move freely, neither in society nor in art. In our archaic period and the classical period, there were two most important structural types, which were the standing nude men and the dressed women, the chorus and the chorale. Interestingly, the number of male statues produced was greater than that of female statues. Female statues are not notable fields, and for some time, male statues could not be more than mere adaptations of male body. More importantly, male figures were usually depicted as nude, while female figures were dressed. The nudism of male body is nothing more than being a proof of the sexual approach to male body. A third reason for the idealization of male body is that the Greeks perceived their gods in the shape of human beings. This perception led to enthusiastic depictions of human body as it resembled that of gods. In the subject matter of classical sculpture, we might expect an enhanced degree of humanity, however divinely inspired, and many claim to recognize it. The approach is simplistic in their method. The hero to were heroically or divinely human in their conception. For example, Politicus, an artist of the era, came to write a book about his art late in the century. It It was not an anatomical textbook, but an essay about ideal proportions to observe in making images of human body. There are tendencies which have back obsessive realism in art and, for instance, lifelike rather than idealized portraiture. And the artists were working on an art which mirrors life, that expresses an ideal in human images, that acknowledges the dominance of pattern and proportion. We have made it clear that male body was praised aesthetically. Classical period developed a certain standard of male beauty. A closer analysis and generalization will lead us to specific characteristics of the male statues. Having still developed the male statues, it's also possible to make some generalizations about male figures corresponding to claim that they were for sexual expectations. One of the most common features of these sculptures were that they were mostly young, depicting and praising the youth. The models were chosen mostly from young and fit athlete or public figures. Whether young or not, the body has to shape up and fit. Even the statues of old warriors or gods were fit as if they were on a show-off of eloquently built muscles. Sculpture, who perfected their techniques, began to idealize male body. The sculpture displays a simplicity with the love and details devoted to hair, hands and feature. For example, hair can be seen in too many forms. Even the crown of the head celebrates the youth. When we look at a piece of work from classical period, we come across with the heroic self-confidence of a young leader, or we are likely to come across with the mature strength and solidity. The Discobolus boy, on his tiptoe muscles and standing firm. That self-confidence sends through the statues causes infinite adoration to male body. It requires a greater perception to appreciate the idealizing styles of classical art. One major reason of idealization is that the Greeks fashioned their gods in the likeness of men. Another key feature of the sculptures is the small and disdainful mouths. Lastly, having the young athletes and warriors sculptures was in fact a means of heroizing the beautiful male body. The total nudity and realistic acceptance are inspiring state sport in his work. As to conclude, the classical sculpture differs from its preceding period in its accurate composition of human anatomy, and as stated earlier, this accuracy enabled the artists to create more natural and lifelike sculptures, and technical advantages to accurate methods led to an idealistic approach to Greek art. Sculptors who mainly worked on male anatomy began to substitute aesthetic forms. Idealization and aesthetic concerns brought about male statues never resembling to their correspondings in real life. That was the end of and so for my excitement, let's stop. And nothing.
Do we have any questions?
And if you would like to see, I have slides to show the Greek sculptures. Would you like to see the perfect bodies, torsos? The first few sculptures belong to archaic period, and then comes the classical, and you can see the perfection in style. The calf period belongs to archaic periods, and you see that the statues just stand to show it visually. On behalf of these, just two legs balanced, but the classical period sculptures just put that the other way. These are all archaic examples, and this is late archaic, you can say, or early classical, and this is a male torso. Just as I have mentioned, this is showing off his muscles. This is a detail of Apollo, which is made dating back to 130 before Christmas. This is just full of the Apollo. Belvedere Apollo, famous name. True. And this head of a girl just shows the fashionable hairstyle. They are all just standards. Another pictures. This just you see here the balance, the great balance. They also need a tree or something to hold back on their lips. This is the spear here. As I mentioned, all young. This is just another copy of the original Greek culture. Another view. We can all say that they are perfect and heavenly. And this is also just early classical example, Zeus. And as I have also just mentioned, even if he's old, he's fit. Another view. Thank you.
I have a comment actually on the presentation of Begüm Tuğlu. And you mentioned dismemberment of the female figures in literature. It was quite effective and inspiring in terms of thinking the roles of the gender in the society and the restrictions upon the women especially. However, I think that there are two edges of dismemberment. Actually, you talk about literature. However, in reality, the one edge of the dismemberment reduces women to a sexual object, as you mentioned. However, on the other hand, the other part reduces the sexuality in women, actually. By which I mean that, actually, as far as I remember, 4 years ago or 3 years ago, I read an article on a newspaper, and it said that there is still going on the castration of women in Syria. Maybe you are also familiar. And I think this is the edge that reduces the sexuality in women, which is paradoxically, clashes with the expectations of the male-dominated social rules, social expectations. I know it is a little bit complicated, but yes. On the one hand, they cut their arms and legs and just, leave the womb to, get in with the sexual organ. But on the other hand, they just castrate the women to, reduce the sexual desire in women. So that's why
this way, it's not actually very distant from each other. Because once you think, the reason why in literature this dismemberment is happening is in order to control women themselves.
Yes.
So the fact is that they're controlling their sexual desires too. Now I know that sounds very schizophrenic, but even in our society, think about it. We expect our women to be either mothers or whores. There are no in between. There are the ones who you get to marry with, and there are the ones you get to have fun with. Think about it. One you expect the sexual desire, and the other one you expect to get the marriage, the motherly, or the emotions. And when they actually think about that conventional stereotypical man, when he gets married, he wants the woman to be pure, but he has to have some kind of intercourse with that woman. And think about the depression he will have, because that's a motherly figure, and he will be, using that body. So in a way, sexual desires are, yes,
it is also a kind of control. And that's what I was also trying to imply. And on the other hand, there are other types of castrations upon women. For example, the head covers of nun in Christianity, and black veils in Islam, and the wigs, for example, the Jewish women uses wigs to cover their heads. And actually, this kind of dismemberment takes place in reality, in real life, and stuff, which is quite related with the religious rituals or religious expectations.
If you look at the side of the story as a literary text, you will have many examples there too. Because if I had time, I would go on with Rapunzel, for example. She cuts her long blonde hair. Only when she cuts her blonde hair and she loses the attractiveness, then she is able to marry the prince. She is she's suffering from dismemberment from her hair. If you look at that point, there are examples from I don't know, if you look at dismemberment in a metaphorical way, even you can give the example of Eve, you know, she's deprived of
and even, I think even the creation itself is patriarchal.
Yeah, because, you know, we are
lacking
that
not the creators for him.
Even Freud said
it is
that we are lacking,
you know,
that 250 grams thing. So
thank you for your presentation.
You said women are reduced to be mothers and horse. What do you think that the position of men in society, just mere laborer?
I don't think so, because personally I think
positions is aren't we reduced to fathers or the laborers?
Oh, I think, you know, subjugating women to this level is also putting more weight to the man's shoulders too. You know, if you think that, you know, we are giving certain labels to women, okay? We said that you have to stay at home, you have to look after children, you have to do this and that, the household. But at the same time, we are saying to men, you have to go to the military duty. You have to earn money to look after your wife. He doesn't have to do it. But in this society which control women, they control men too. They say that you have to get a job, you have to take care of your children, you have to take care of your wife, your wife should stay at home. You know, there are certain things that push upon men too.
So it's not a male power that just governs the society, it's just a superior power.
I think it's
on both the males and just females, just women and men.
Yes, psychologically, yes, we can say that. But I would personally argue that male domination is heavier upon the society.
Think about the governor of the country.
Sorry?
Think about the governor of the country. Have we ever had a female governor in the country?
So you should be one of these less.
You should one for a woman.
Or is it easy for a woman to be a governor in a country? Let me ask.
Why not?
Why not? It is not.
He's not living in our country.
It is not.
You have to remember that.
I know there.
Yes,
we are.
Maybe far from your culture, but.
Yeah. He's living in a European country.
But my opinion is when a woman just climbs up the top, she's not female. Just reduced on her sexual features. That is also true for men.
Yes, but on the other hand, you said that when a woman becomes a governor, she is no more a woman. You said.
But it is true for men also.
But when a man becomes a governor, he's still a man.
No, he's not.
Yes, he is still a man.
What does being a man?
That's a whole level of discussion, I guess.
Okay.
But you're very right on the point of arguing that when women are very successful, we have the tendency of labeling them as, you know, the devil, the monstrous image. Yes. Think about Devil Wears Prada. When a woman is a strong career person, we directly say that, oh, she's very ambitious, she's very strong, very, you know, powerful, she has no emotions, she's very strict in her job, and she has to play the devil in order to have the power, you know, because otherwise no one really listens to her. You know, she's just a woman who cares. Because of that element, because of that element, the woman has to be stronger, and that's why she is labeled as the devil, and she's, you know, at the very top of certain firms or companies.
When the expectations change, you know, it is not, you know, it doesn't have to be
Probably not
drastically.
get worse, by the way. It is
Discussion
Yes. Okay, sorry. It is not, you know, I do not expect it to be drastically, but when the expectations begin to change, so some things about the gender begins to change, I think. If we start not expecting women to be strong and witch-like and unsexed and castrated in terms of her sexuality, then something happens that when a woman becomes the governor or the governess, then she is still a female, you know, she has still female or feminine features on her, but she can be also a governor. If we, you know, begin to somehow accept this kind of thing, if we, you know, approach the matter from that perspective, then I think we have our genders. And even on the other hand, even you know, there are some kind of speculations or, you know, theories about the concept of gender. I also accepted that it is also something constructed. It is also something, somehow, a disability, you know, it is man-made and artificial. However, if there is something like gender, that we should approach it in a more humanistic way, I think. And I know you also think so.
Thank you for your comment.
Actually, not a question, but I remember my first year course, Introduction to American Studies, and what you, Ekrem, talk about Greek idol masculinity, also very great impact on American popular culture. Have you had any chance to, you know, study about
Bodybuilding, just
not bodybuilding, actually Superman, Batman,
no.
Lambo, all that actually male figures comes from Greek idol, and yeah, it was good to know. Remind me of that course. And is there in Germany that kind of movement or popular culture boom about Greek masculinity and that kind of expression?
Not just specific to any European country, but just in the whole country, I think, in the whole world. And so,
But
just
America, United States,
the
most of
Testament are enemies of dead bodies. So it's also bad for us in terms of gender. We have to like them. For example, a woman has to wear makeup. So we have to build our muscles up. Same.
We still have time, I suppose. Well, congratulations. I thoroughly enjoyed your papers. Thanks for that. But 2 points. I'd like to change the subject a little bit. 2 points I'd like to raise. First, with Ömer's paper. Now, just a question and comments mingled, perhaps. You talked about Nora and one attempt in her life, perhaps, out of love. She forged her father's signature and gathered money for Torvald's help. So, and then you gave another example, which we laughed at. This reminded us of a stereotypical excuse, I have headache. So, do you think that there really is love in that marriage? I wonder.
Firstly, I think in the period is 19th century, and women have not their legal voices, and women, in fact, they didn't realize themselves, because always they are under the oppression of patriarchy. While they were single, as they once told, the head was their father, and when they were married, the head was the husband, and their life didn't change. They always saw that there's a male figure, he's oppressive, he's strong, he is protective, and the woman generally, women think that themselves they are happy. For example, as I said in their awakenings, first in Nora, yes, we are right, as all parties of 19th century women, which should be protective and should sacrifice herself for husband and children, she forgery. She filed lawsuits without her husband's consent, and she does. And after her realization, she starts to awaken because she lost her husband. At least she thinks like this. She thinks that she lost her husband, but when her husband reacts her harshly, even though she does some sacrifice for himself, and by working at night without telling him that I borrowed money without consent of him, she sees that although I loved him, she reacts me harshly. She threatens me by not giving me my children custody, and she thinks that although I love him, she doesn't love me because she thinks that the thing which Torvald see as important point is what other people say, because the society thinks that women does not have rights to file lawsuits without their husband's consent, and when people hear this situation, he will be ashamed. For that reason, she does this reaction. And when it comes to I have a headache point, in that manner, in fact, as I said, although those are oppressed women, especially Edna and Nora from the very beginning are restrictive women. As an example of eating macaroons or filing lawsuits at the beginning, and then when they come to their house, in fact that's not an excuse, but in fact maybe women did not change from the very beginning. They can do, for example, in fact from the very beginning I think women have the power on their hands, because however they are oppressed, in somehow they have power in their hands. Although males see them as sex objects, because from that point Torvald sees her like sex objects, but she has the power to resist her. I have had it.
So thanks for that answer. Since you talked about hands and sacrifice theme.
Pardon, I didn't.
No, I'm just trying to switch to Begüm, the other speaker. That's why hands and sacrifice. I was just trying to remind you of that. Do you think, Begüm, all your selected examples, well done, and actually they have been supporting your argument well, but with one exception, to my understanding, the girl without hands, do you think there's self-sacrifice on the foreground when the other examples are considered?
Well, there is self-sacrifice, but what I was trying to argue is that this self-sacrifice is because she wants to live up to the expectations of the society. She does not want to be a Lilith. She does not want to be, lowered to that level. And the reason why she's sacrificing is that unconsciously she doesn't want to do that, but she's constructed to do so. She has no other choice. She feels obligated to do that. And when you think of it, no one would ever, give her own hand to pay her father's debt, which is ridiculous, because her father is having a kind of pact with the devil itself. So when you see of it, it's her father's sins. She does not have to pay for them. But she feels obligated to do that, and because of her man, she uses her hands. That's the way I look at it. I attribute